In 1982, British pop was lost in the shadows of post-punk, its charts ruled by gloom and grit. But then, two teenage friends from Bushey Mead's school, Michael and Andrew Ridgeley, stepped into the spotlight, weaponizing neon colors, infectious hooks, and unapologetic joy. Wham! Didn't just offer an escape, they ignited a revolution, rebranding pop as a force of pure fun at a time when nobody thought it could matter again. The official story hails them as icons of the era, but the real impact of Wham on pop music rewired the DNA of the genre forever and set off a backlash that few saw coming. How did a bedroom demo tape spark a global transformation? Michael and Andrew Ridgeley first crossed paths in the corridors of Bushey Mead's school, just north of London, at the tail end of the 1970s. Both sons of working-class families, George, born Georgios Panayotou to a Greek Cypriot restaurateur and an English dancer, and Andrew, the quick-witted local with a knack for mischief, they bonded over a shared love of pop records and the restless urge to do something bigger. In bedrooms filled with borrowed vinyl and battered tape decks, the pair spent countless afternoons experimenting with melodies, trading lyrics, and dreaming up songs that could one day lift them out of suburbia. By 1981, while many of their classmates chased the safety of 9-to-5 jobs, George and Andrew were already assembling demo tapes, determined to break into an industry dominated by moody synths and post-punk gloom. Their early tracks, raw, bright, and unashamedly catchy, stood in bold contrast to the prevailing sound. George, still a teenager, was already showing signs of the songwriter he would become, scribbling lyrics in school notebooks, obsessing over chord changes, and pushing for hooks that would stick in your head long after the tape had stopped. The first gigs were modest affairs, youth clubs, school halls, anywhere that would have them. Yet even in these early shows, the chemistry was unmistakable. Andrew played the Joker, rallying the crowd, while George took charge of the music, fine-tuning arrangements and steering the duo's creative direction. Friends recall the sight of the two huddled over a cassette machine, layering harmonies and arguing over which chorus worked best. Each session brought them closer to a sound that felt entirely their own, one that radiated optimism at a time when British pop seemed allergic to joy. It was this partnership, forged in the ordinary corners of suburban England, that set the stage for everything that followed. Before the neon shirts, before the screaming fans, there were just two friends with a cheap tape recorder and a stubborn belief that pop music could be fun again. For George in particular, these early years were more than a stepping stone. They were a training ground for the songwriting control and creative ownership that would soon define his career. Neon colors, oversized slogan tees, and a grin that practically bounced off the screen, Wham's arrival was impossible to ignore. In 1982, as their debut single edged onto radio playlists, manager Simon Napier Bell and the team at Epic plotted a strategy that would cut through the gloom of post-punk Britain. The plan? Make Wham not just heard, but seen. Internal memos from the label called for maximum visibility, fun, and fashion, and no detail was left to chance. The duo's look, white shorts, day-glow socks, and those now legendary Choose Life shirts, became instant shorthand for youthful rebellion. Designed by Catherine Hamnett, the slogan was meant as a call for positivity, but it quickly sparked debate. Some critics read it as a sharp anti-drug message. Others accused the band of trivializing social issues. Either way, the shirts flew off shelves, and soon every teenage bedroom from Manchester to Melbourne had a Wham poster taped to the wall. Music videos became their secret weapon. With MTV's rise, Wham invested heavily in coordinated outfits and set design, turning 3-minute promos into mini fashion parades. The Club Tropicana video, all sun-bleached beaches and poolside antics, flashed a vision of escape that felt light years away from Britain's rainy streets. Each new single arrived with a fresh palette of colors and a sense of pure, unfiltered fun. The press couldn't decide if it was genius marketing or empty gloss, but the public had already made up its mind. Wham were everywhere, and their image was as catchy as their hooks. Behind the scenes, Napier Bell orchestrated every detail, pushing for ever bolder visuals and playful controversy. Outfitting budgets soared as the band's wardrobe grew to match their ambitions. The media buzz, both breathless and skeptical, only fueled the phenomenon. Fashion critics weighed in, rival pop acts scrambled to copy the look, and Wham found themselves at the center of a new kind of pop stardom, one where style was as important as sound. The result was a blueprint for music marketing that would echo for decades, even as some bristled at the polish. For a moment, pop music was fun again, and everyone wanted a piece of it. Every Wham single seemed engineered for instant recall, but the secret sat deeper than neon visuals or headline-grabbing shirts. George Michael, barely out of his teens, obsessed over every chorus, testing, rewriting, and polishing until a melody could survive even the cheapest radio. Tracks like Wake Me Up Before You Go Go didn't just arrive fully formed. Michael built them around hooks designed to bounce from club speakers to school corridors. The chorus lands with a 1-2 punch, call and response, hand claps, and a melody that lingers long after the last note. Yet beneath the surface, Wham songs borrowed as much from American soul and funk as from British pop. Everything She Wants rides a groove that wouldn't feel out of place in a Motown set, while Wham rap slips between bubblegum pop and streetwise R&B. Michael's songwriting fused these influences, crafting a sound that felt both familiar and brand new. The result? Pop that could fill a dance floor, but also stand up to close listening. No song demonstrates this more than Last Christmas. Released in 1984, it wraps heartbreak in shimmering synths and a chorus that's become a holiday ritual. Though it never reached #1 in the UK on initial release, Last Christmas endures as one of the most streamed and played seasonal songs worldwide. Its bittersweet melody and sing-along refrain have outlasted countless trends, proving the staying power of a well-built pop song. This attention to craft didn't go unnoticed. By the 1990s, boy bands and pop acts from Take That to NSYNC were openly borrowing Wham's formula. Catchy hooks, danceable beats, and a chorus everyone could join. Even now, the structure of a Wham hit echoes in the work of artists like Bruno Mars and Dua Lipa. Michael's role as chief composer set the standard for pop songcraft, showing that fun and sophistication could share the same stage. The appetite for bigger stages and even more ambitious records was only growing. In April 1985, Wham landed in Beijing, stepping onto a stage no Western pop act had ever reached. Months of delicate negotiation had gone into this unlikely tour. Simon Napier Bell, the band's manager, spent endless hours navigating government meetings, translating the language of pop into something China's officials could accept. The result? A 2-concert deal with every lyric and costume vetted, every move scrutinized by party censors eager to control the message. The first concert, held at the Workers' Gymnasium, began with an uneasy silence. Rows of Chinese students and young workers sat in perfect lines, hands folded, faces blank. Decades of state-approved music had left them unsure how to react. Wham opened with the same infectious energy they brought to London clubs, but applause barely rippled through the crowd. Michael and Ridgeley exchanged glances, then pressed on, smiling, waving, urging the audience to join in. After a few songs, a single student stood up and started to dance. Security hesitated, then let it happen. The ice was broken. By the end of the night, dozens of young people were on their feet, clapping and swaying, caught between curiosity and joy. Outside the arena, Chinese media covered the event with a mix of fascination and caution. State newspapers described Wham as youthful ambassadors and debated whether Western pop would corrupt or inspire. For British diplomats and music journalists trailing the band, the spectacle felt like a turning point, proof that music could cross even the most fortified borders. Ridgeley later recalled the surreal sight of local fans snapping photos and trading badges, eager for any scrap of Western culture. The tour was more than a publicity coup. It was a moment when pop music became a tool of cultural diplomacy, opening a door between two worlds. Wham returned to the UK with headlines proclaiming them pioneers, but the experience also raised new questions about creative freedom. Back home, the band found themselves under fresh scrutiny. Their every move now a statement about what pop could and should be. The scale of their influence had grown, and so had the expectations. For George Michael, the challenge of balancing global stardom with artistic control was just beginning. The first taste of real success brought more than screaming fans and platinum records. It brought a contract crisis that threatened to unravel everything George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley had built. In March 1982, Wham signed with Intervision Records, a fledgling label run by Mark Dean and Shamsi Ahmed. The deal, struck when both were barely out of school, offered just £500 each as an advance and promised royalties that looked generous on paper but proved punishing in practice. The fine print set their UK royalty rate at a meager 8%, with nothing at all for 12-inch singles. Formats that, in the dance-hungry 1980s, made up a growing chunk of sales. Internationally, the rates dipped even lower, with 6% for albums and just 4% for singles. For every chart-topping hit, for every club anthem pressed to vinyl, the band saw only a trickle of what they had earned. As the singles flew up the charts, the reality of the deal set in. Account statements arrived late or not at all. Royalty ledgers, when they came, showed numbers that did not add up. Wham watched as their label cashed in, while they struggled to pay for studio time or even basic touring costs. The situation came to a head in 1983 when Intervision released Club Fantastic Megamix without the band's approval, a move Wham publicly condemned, urging fans to boycott the single. Ridgeley, ever the agitator, pushed for legal action, convinced that the label was exploiting their inexperience and urgency to succeed. George, meanwhile, began consulting lawyers, determined to regain control over their music and future earnings. Litigation followed, with Wham challenging Intervision's tactics in court and in the press. The legal battle was bruising, but it forced the label's hand. By early 1984, Intervision, facing mounting accusations and industry pressure, agreed to a settlement. The contract was nullified, and Wham were released from their obligations, though the full terms remained confidential. The fallout bankrupted Intervision and set a new standard for how young artists approached record deals. Free from their old contract, Wham signed with Epic Records, securing advances and royalty rates that finally matched their chart dominance. The ordeal left scars, but it also gave George Michael a crash course in the business of pop, a lesson he would carry into every deal that followed. Ridgeley's insistence on fighting back and George's resolve to never lose control again reshaped their ambitions. From that point forward, every creative decision carried the weight of hard-won autonomy. The story of Careless Whisper begins long before it topped charts. George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley, still in their teens, scribbled the famous saxophone line on a battered notebook. But the song's journey from bedroom demo to worldwide hit would prove anything but simple. When the time came to record it, Michael was determined to make every detail count. He flew to Muscle Shoals, Alabama to work with Jerry Wexler, a legendary producer whose credits included Aretha Franklin and Wilson Pickett. Wexler brought in Tom Scott, a respected American saxophonist, to tackle the song's signature riff. Scott played it note perfect, but George wasn't satisfied. He asked for subtle changes, so subtle that even seasoned studio veterans struggled to hear the difference. To Michael, though, something essential was missing. The take was technically flawless, but it didn't carry the ache he heard in his head. Publisher Dick Leahy, sensing the song's potential, put the brakes on its release. He wanted a version that would do justice to the melody and to Michael's growing ambitions. Back in London, George took charge. At Sarmwest Studio, he reassembled the track from the ground up, calling on engineer Chris Porter for support. The search for the perfect sax solo became almost mythic. 11 players auditioned, each one falling just short of the sound Michael wanted. Steve Gregory, a veteran of countless sessions, arrived late in the process. His saxophone couldn't quite reach the highest notes of the melody, so he and Porter hatched a plan. Slow the tape down, let Gregory play the solo a semitone lower, then speed it back up in playback. The result was an uncanny, almost vocal tone that shimmered with longing. Michael walked in during the playback and, for the first time, smiled. This was the sound he'd been chasing. The final recording, credited to George Michael as a solo artist, became an instant classic. The tape speed trick turned a technical limitation into the song's emotional signature. Steve Gregory's solo, both familiar and strange, set the mood for a ballad that would define Michael's artistry. Careless Whisper soared to #1 in nearly 25 countries and sold close to 6 million copies worldwide. For George, it was more than a hit. It was proof that creative control and perfectionism could produce something timeless. In the studio, he had found his voice, and the world was ready to listen. In April 1985, Wham became the first Western pop act to perform in China, a milestone documented by international news outlets and official Chinese records. Throughout their career, Michael and Andrew Ridgeley used visual flair and infectious songwriting to reshape the British pop landscape, moving from school friends at Bushy Meads to global icons. Their legal battle with Intervision, outlined in 1984 court documents, exposed widespread exploitation of young artists in the industry and led to more transparent contracts for future acts. Yet, many details about the band's internal creative process remain undocumented, as private studio notes and some business records are still unavailable. Today, Wham's influence endures. Elements of their sound and image persist in modern pop, and Last Christmas continues to chart every year. The evidence is clear. Wham didn't just brighten the charts, they helped define what pop music could be in a new era.